Every school has that one child, the child who sits quietly in the corner, the child who never raises his hand, the child who eats lunch alone and looks out the window like he is searching for something nobody else can see. At Riverside Elementary, that child was Marcus. Marcus was 9 years old. He had soft brown eyes that always looked a little tired. He had a small, gentle smile that appeared only sometimes, and he had a pair of shoes, old shoes, worn-out shoes, the same shoes every single day. For as long as anyone could remember, nobody thought much about it at first. Schools have poor children. That is simply the reality of life. Teachers saw the shoes, looked away and moved on, because there was always something more urgent to deal with: a fight in the hallway, parent complaint, a missing assignment. Marcus and his shoes were simply part of the background. Invisible, forgotten, unimportant. But on one cold Tuesday morning in November, everything changed. A substitute teacher named Mrs. Carroll had been assigned to Marcus's class that day. She was new. She had not yet learned to look past the quiet children. She had not yet built the habit of moving on. When the students lined up to walk to the cafeteria, Mrs. Carroll watched them file past her one by one. That was when she saw it. Marcus was walking with a limp. It was small, almost hidden. He was clearly trying very hard to conceal it. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed straight ahead. He moved like a soldier trying not to show weakness. But Mrs. Carroll saw it. She looked down at his feet and her stomach dropped. The shoes were destroyed. The left shoe had a crack running across the entire front. The sole was separating from the upper, flapping slightly with every step. The right shoe was a completely different shoe altogether. Different color, different style, different size. It was clearly too small. It was squeezing his foot so tightly that the sides of the shoe were bulging outward. Mrs. Carroll stood frozen in the doorway. She whispered to the classroom aide standing beside her, "How long has that child been wearing those shoes?" The aide glanced over and shrugged quietly. "As long as I can remember." Mrs. Carroll went directly to the front office after lunch. She sat down with the school secretary and asked to speak with someone in charge. Within 20 minutes, Principal Donna Hayes was sitting across from her at a small table. Mrs. Carroll described what she had seen. She described the limp. She described the mismatched shoes. She described the look on Marcus's face, that tight, controlled, practiced expression of a child hiding pain. Principal Hayes listened without interrupting. But inside, something was shifting. She was a woman who had spent 22 years in education. She had seen poverty. She had seen neglect. She had seen children come to school hungry, exhausted and frightened. But something about what Mrs. Carroll was describing felt different, felt deeper, felt older, like a wound that had been quietly bleeding for a very long time. After Mrs. Carroll left, Principal Hayes pulled Marcus's school file. She opened it slowly and began reading from the very beginning. Marcus had been at Riverside Elementary since kindergarten. 5 years. She flipped through page after page of teacher notes and annual reports, and there it was, mentioned briefly, almost as a side note, in 3 separate years. Student appears to wear the same footwear consistently. Family may benefit from clothing assistance program. Follow-up needed. Shoes appear worn. Student does not complain. 3 different teachers. 3 different years. 3 small observations. And then nothing. No follow-up. No action. No one had ever pulled on that thread. Principal Hayes closed the file. She sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. 5 years. That little boy had been walking into the school in pain for 5 years, and the world had simply walked past him. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and walked quietly down the hallway toward the cafeteria. She found Marcus sitting alone at the end of a long table. He was eating slowly. His tray was only half full. His worn-out shoes were just barely visible beneath the bench. She watched him for a long moment. He looked up and noticed her. His expression did not change. He simply looked at her with those calm, tired eyes, like a child who had learned very early that adults look and then walk away. But Principal Hayes did not walk away. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She folded her hands on the table, looked at him gently and said, "Hi, Marcus. I just wanted to come and sit with you for a little while. Is that okay?" Marcus looked at her for a long, careful moment. Then very slowly he nodded, and that single nod, that one small, quiet movement, was the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives forever. There is a sound that silence makes. Most people never hear it, because most people are too busy, too distracted, too caught up in their own noise to notice the quiet ones. But if you ever sit still long enough, if you ever slow down just enough, you can hear it. It sounds like a child eating lunch alone. It sounds like small footsteps trying not to limp. It sounds like a 9-year-old boy who has learned that asking for help is a luxury he simply cannot afford. That was the sound of Marcus. And for 5 long years, nobody had truly listened. Principal Donna Hayes did not sleep well that night. She lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, thinking about those tired brown eyes, thinking about that small careful nod, thinking about 3 teacher notes in 5 years that led absolutely nowhere. She kept asking herself one question: How does a child walk into the same building, past the same adults, in the same broken shoes, for 5 entire years, and nobody stops everything to find out why? She had no good answer, and that was the most painful part. The next morning she arrived at school 1 hour early. She made herself a cup of coffee she never drank, sat at her desk, and opened Marcus's file again. This time she read every single page, every report card, every attendance record, every teacher comment from kindergarten all the way to 4th grade. Marcus had never failed a class. He was not a troublemaker. He had no disciplinary records at all. He showed up every single day. Rain, cold, snow, it did not matter. Marcus was always there. That struck her deeply. A child in pain, a child who clearly had very little at home, still showed up every single day. Most adults would have given up long before that. She began making calls at 7:30 in the morning. First, she called his 2nd grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who was now teaching at a different school across town. Mrs. Patterson remembered Marcus immediately. Her voice softened the moment she heard his name. "Sweet boy," she said quietly. "Always so polite, always so contained. I offered him shoes once from our classroom donation box and he refused. He said his shoes were fine. I did not push, I should have pushed." Her voice broke slightly at the end of that sentence. Hayes thanked her and moved on. She called his 3rd grade teacher next, then his 1st grade teacher. Each one remembered Marcus. Each one described the same child: quiet, gentle, proud in a way that was too old for his age. Every single one of them said a version of the same thing. "I noticed, but I did not want to embarrass him. I thought the family just needed time. I assumed someone else had already looked into it, and there it was, the real reason, not cruelty, not laziness, simply the oldest and most dangerous assumption in the world. Someone else will handle it." Hayes put the phone down and rubbed her face with both hands. She thought about how systems fail children, not with one dramatic moment, but with 100 small moments of looking away, 100 small decisions to let someone else deal with it, 100 quiet Tuesday mornings where nobody sat down across from the quiet boy. Until now. She walked to Marcus's classroom just before 1st period. She stood at the door and watched him come in. He was one of the first to arrive. He hung his backpack on his hook, pulled out his notebook, and sat down without a word. She watched his feet. Even sitting still, she could see the discomfort. The right shoe was so tight he had loosened the laces completely. The tongue of the shoe was pushed to one side. He shifted in his seat every few minutes, quietly adjusting, quietly managing, quietly enduring. He caught her eye once, just for a second, and then looked back down at his notebook. That look, that brief, unreadable look, carried something inside it that Hayes could not quite name. It was not shame. It was not fear. It was something closer to resignation. The look of a child who expected to be watched. And then forgotten. Hayes stepped away from the door and walked back to her office with a decision already forming in her chest. She was not going to observe Marcus from a distance anymore. She was not going to make a note in a file. She was not going to assume someone else would handle it. She was going to sit down with that boy. She was going to ask the questions nobody had asked. She was going to listen, really listen, for as long as it took, because 5 years of silence had already gone on long enough. And somewhere inside those worn-out shoes, there was a story that deserved to finally be heard. There is a kind of bravery that nobody writes about. It does not look like a soldier charging into battle. It does not look like a hero saving someone from a burning building. It does not come with applause or medals or photographs. It looks like a 9-year-old boy, sitting in a chair too big for him, in a quiet office, with his small hands folded in his lap, and his eyes fixed on the floor, carrying a weight that would break most grown men, and not making a single sound about it. That was Marcus, and what he was about to say would stop Principal Hayes's heart completely. She had called him to her office gently, not in the middle of class, not with a formal note that would make other children stare. She had simply walked past him in the hallway between periods, leaned down quietly, and said, "Marcus, when you get a free moment today, would you like to come sit with me for a bit? I have some good cookies in my office." She said it like an invitation between friends, not like a summons, not like an investigation, just two people, sharing a quiet moment. Marcus had looked at her carefully, that same guarded, measuring look she had seen through the classroom door. Then he nodded once, and went back to walking. He appeared at her door 20 minutes later. Hayes had arranged the office carefully. No big desk between them, just 2 chairs facing each other near the window. A small plate of chocolate chip cookies on the table beside them. Soft afternoon light coming through the glass. She wanted it to feel safe. She wanted it to feel like the most unthreatening place on earth. Marcus sat down slowly. He took one cookie when she offered, held it in both hands, but did not eat it. Hayes began with small things. She asked about his favorite subject. He said math. She asked if he had a favorite soccer player. His eyes flickered with the smallest light and he said a name quietly. She laughed softly and agreed. And then, very gently, like someone defusing something fragile, she let the conversation drift. "Marcus," she said softly, "I want you to know that this office is a safe place. Anything you tell me here, I hear with a kind heart, okay?" He looked at her, said nothing, but his fingers tightened slightly around the cookie. "I noticed your shoes," she said simply, "and I just want to understand, because I care about you. Can you tell me a little about them?" The silence that followed was long. Not an awkward silence. Not an angry silence. The silence of a child deciding, weighing, measuring whether this adult was truly different from all the others. Hayes did not fill the silence. She had learned long ago that the worst thing you can do, when a quiet child is finally deciding to speak, is to open your own mouth. So she waited, and then Marcus looked up, not at her face, at the window, at something far away outside the glass, and he said 6 words. 6 small, simple, devastating words. "My mom needs the money more." Hayes felt something crack open inside her chest. She kept her face calm. She kept her breathing steady, because she knew, she absolutely knew, that if she showed him how deeply those words had just cut her, he would close like a door, and she would never get him back. "Tell me about your mom," she said softly, and Marcus began to talk, slowly at first, like a tap that has not been opened in years, just a trickle, then a little more, then a little more. His mother's name was Linda. She was 34 years old. She had the warmest laugh Marcus had ever heard. She made the best rice and beans on the entire planet. She called him her little warrior every single morning before school. She worked the early shift at a laundry facility, and the evening shift at a grocery store, 6 days a week. Without fail. Without complaint. She gets really tired, Marcus said quietly. Like, really, really tired. Sometimes when I come home, she is already asleep on the couch with her work clothes still on. Hayes nodded slowly. How long has she been this tired? She asked. Marcus thought for a moment. Since I was in first grade, he said. First grade. Hayes did the math quietly in her head. 3 years. Linda had been collapsing from exhaustion for 3 years. Does your mom ever go to the doctor? Hayes asked carefully. Marcus shook his head. She says doctors cost too much, he said. She says we need the money for rent and food and medicine from the pharmacy. Medicine, Hayes said gently. What kind of medicine? Marcus frowned slightly, trying to remember. White pills, he said. And some orange ones. She takes them every morning, but sometimes we run out and she skips them and then she gets worse. Hayes felt the full weight of those words settle over the room like a heavy blanket. This was not just poverty. This was a sick woman, alone, working herself to the bone, skipping her own medication so that her son could eat. And her son, her 9-year-old little warrior, was wearing broken mismatched shoes for 5 years, stuffing newspaper into the toes to make them fit, hiding his limp in school hallways so that every spare dollar could go back to his mother. Hayes reached out and placed her hand gently over Marcus's. He did not pull away. Marcus, she said, her voice steady but her eyes full. You are one of the bravest people I have ever met in my entire life. He looked at her, confused, like bravery was a word that belonged to other people. I am not brave, he said quietly. I just love my mom. And in that moment, in that small sunlit office, with a cookie still untouched in his hands, Principal Donna Hayes made a silent promise. Not a professional promise. Not a policy promise. A human one. She was going to fix this. She did not know how yet. She did not know how much it would take. But she was going to fix this. If it was the last thing she ever did. There are homes that look ordinary from the outside. A door like any other door. A hallway like any other hallway. A number on the wall that means nothing to the people walking past. But behind some of those doors, behind some of those ordinary walls, lives a story so heavy, so quiet, so carefully hidden from the world, that when it finally comes to light, it does not just break your heart, it rebuilds it. Principal Hayes drove to Marcus's apartment that same evening. She had the address from the school records. She had a small bag of groceries on the passenger seat. Nothing dramatic, just bread, milk, some fruit, a few simple things. She did not want to arrive empty-handed, but she also did not want to arrive like a charity. She wanted to arrive like a human being, coming to see another human being. She sat in her car outside the building for a long moment before going in. The building was old. The paint on the outside walls was peeling in long, tired strips. 2 of the hallway lights were broken. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there for months. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, found apartment 14B, and knocked gently. There was a long pause, then the sound of slow, careful movement from inside. The door opened, and Hayes saw Linda for the first time. She was not what Hayes had imagined. She had imagined someone defeated, someone who had given up, someone hollow. But Linda was none of those things. She was thin, yes, painfully thin. Her cheekbones were too sharp. Her eyes sat a little too deep in her face. Her skin had a grayish undertone that Hayes recognized immediately as the color of someone who is running on empty. But her eyes were alive, warm, intelligent, and fiercely, quietly proud. She was wearing her work uniform. She had clearly just come home. She was still standing by the door because sitting down took effort she was carefully rationing. Mrs. Linda, Hayes said gently. My name is Donna Hayes. I am the principal at Marcus's school. I am sorry to come without calling first. I wanted to meet you. Linda looked at her for a careful moment. The same measuring look Marcus had. That guarded, dignified assessment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. Come in, she said quietly. Hayes stepped inside, and the grocery bag in her hand suddenly felt very small. The apartment was clean, spotlessly, painfully clean. Linda had clearly worked very hard to keep it that way. But it was almost empty. A mattress on the living room floor with a neatly folded blanket. A small wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs. A single shelf on the wall with 3 books and a photograph. In the photograph, a younger, healthier Linda was holding a baby Marcus. Both of them laughing. Both of them glowing. Both of them completely unaware of what was coming. Hayes set the groceries down on the table. Linda looked at them but said nothing. Pride and gratitude fighting silently behind her eyes. They sat across from each other at that small table. Hayes asked gentle questions. Linda answered carefully and slowly, the way water finds its way through stone. The truth began to come through. Linda had first felt the symptoms 3 years ago. Fatigue so deep it felt like drowning. Pain in her joints that came and went like bad weather. Headaches that lasted for days. A body that was slowly, systematically, shutting parts of itself down. She had gone to a free clinic once. The doctor had looked concerned. Had given her a list of tests she needed. Tests that cost money she did not have. She had folded the list, put it in her pocket, and gone straight to her evening shift at the grocery store. Because rent was due. Because Marcus needed to eat. Because there was no one else. I kept thinking I would get to it, Linda said quietly, her hands folded on the table. I kept thinking, next month, next month, next month. Her voice trailed off. Next month had turned into next year. Next year had turned into 3 years. And every month she had pushed her own body further down the list. Below rent, below food, below Marcus's school supplies, below everything. The shoes, Hayes said softly. Linda closed her eyes for just a moment. He told you, she said. He did, Hayes said gently. He loves you very much. Linda pressed her lips together tightly, the way people do when they are holding something enormous inside. I found out about the shoes 6 months ago, Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea. He had never said a word. I thought he had shoes from the donation drive at school. She stopped, swallowed hard. When I found out, I cried for an entire night, she said. Not because of the shoes, but because my 9-year-old son had decided that his pain was less important than mine. No child should ever have to decide that. Hayes reached across the small table and covered Linda's hand with her own. The same gesture she had used with Marcus just hours before. 2 hands, 2 people, 1 broken, beautiful family, quietly holding themselves together with nothing but love and sheer will. Linda, Hayes said firmly but gently. You are not alone anymore. I need you to hear that. Not as a principal, not as a school official, as a person sitting across from you at this table. You are not alone anymore. Linda looked at her, and for the first time in 3 years, the fierce pride in her eyes cracked just slightly, not into defeat, into relief, the kind of relief that only comes when someone who has been carrying everything alone finally feels another pair of hands, reaching out to share the weight. Hayes drove home that night in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the dark road ahead, and the image of that small, clean, empty apartment, and a mother and son, quietly protecting each other from a world that had not been paying attention. She gripped the steering wheel and made the same promise she had made to Marcus, only louder this time, more certain, more fierce. This family was not going to fall through the cracks. Not on her watch. Not anymore. Not ever again. There is a moment, in every sleeping town, in every busy school, in every distracted community, when something happens that makes everyone stop. Not a loud thing, not an explosive thing, just a quiet, simple human thing that lands in the chest like a stone dropped in still water. And the ripples, those ripples go out, and out, and out, touching every edge, waking every sleeping heart. That moment came to Riverside Elementary, on a gray Wednesday morning, when Principal Donna Hayes walked into the staff room, closed the door behind her, and told her teachers the truth. She had thought carefully about what to say. She had rehearsed it in the car. She had written notes she never looked at. She had planned to be professional, measured, composed. But the moment she stood in front of those 12 faces, all looking at her with their coffee cups and their tired morning eyes, the rehearsed words dissolved. She simply told them what she had seen. The shoes, the limp Marcus had been hiding for years, the office conversation, the 6 words. My mom needs the money more. The apartment, the mattress on the floor, the empty refrigerator, Linda's gray skin and proud eyes, the folded list of medical tests that had never been done. She told them all of it, and when she finished, the staff room was so quiet, you could hear the old heater ticking in the corner. Mrs. Patterson, the art teacher, spoke first. She did not say anything eloquent. She did not make a speech. She simply put down her coffee cup, looked at the table, and said, I walked past that boy every single day. Her voice broke on the last word, and that was all it took. One broken voice, one honest admission, and the room came apart. A male PE teacher named Mr. Brooks, a large, loud, rugby-playing man who nobody had ever seen show emotion, put his face in his hands. The school librarian, Mrs. Osei, quietly took off her glasses and pressed her fingers against her closed eyes. The young second-grade teacher, Miss Ramirez, who had only been at the school for 7 months, pushed back her chair, stood up, and said with a steady voice that surprised everyone, including herself, So what are we going to do? That question, those 5 simple words, changed the entire energy of the room, because grief without direction is just pain. But grief with purpose, that becomes something else entirely. That becomes power. Hayes straightened up. Here is what we are going to do, she said. Within the first hour, a plan had already begun forming. Miss Ramirez volunteered to start a private staff donation fund immediately, not a public campaign, not a social media post, something quiet and dignified, because Linda was a proud woman, and the help needed to arrive like a hand extended between equals, not like charity dropped from above. By lunchtime, the fund already had enough for 2 weeks of groceries, new shoes for Marcus in the correct size, a full set of school clothes, and a small amount set aside for household basics. Mr. Brooks personally drove to 3 different stores that afternoon. He bought Marcus 2 pairs of shoes, one for school, one for weekends. He measured the size against a sheet of paper Marcus had stepped on that morning. He also bought warm socks, a winter jacket, and a small backpack because he had noticed Marcus's old one had a broken zipper held together with a safety pin. Nobody asked him to do any of that. He simply did it, because some people, when they wake up completely. Meanwhile, Hayes had been on the phone all morning. She called the district's family support coordinator. She called a local nonprofit that connected families to medical assistance programs. She called a community health clinic 12 blocks from the school. She called a social worker she had known for 15 years. Every single person she called said the same thing. Send me the details. I will make it happen today. Because that is what communities do. When they finally decide to show up, they do not move slowly. They move like water that has been held back too long. All at once, all together, unstoppable. The school counselor, Mr. David, drove to the community health clinic personally that afternoon. He spoke to the director for 40 minutes. When he came back, he walked straight into Hayes's office and said, They will see Linda tomorrow morning. No cost, no paperwork barrier, just bring her in. Hayes sat back in her chair. She thought about Linda at that small table, the folded list of tests sitting in some drawer somewhere. 3 years of next month, next month, next month. I will call her tonight, Hayes said quietly. But before she could make that call, something happened that nobody had planned. Something small, something that would stay with everyone in that building for the rest of their lives. Marcus was called to the principal's office after the last bell. He walked in slowly, that careful, measured walk, a steady, expression unreadable. Hayes gestured to the chair across from her. On the chair was a large brown paper bag. Marcus looked at it, then looked at her. "That is for you," she said simply. "From everyone here who cares about you." He stood very still for a long moment. Then he walked to the chair, reached into the bag, and pulled out the first pair of new shoes. He turned them over in his hands slowly, running his fingers along the clean white soles, pressing his thumb against the firm, uncracked leather, feeling the solid, unbroken shape of something that had been whole from the very beginning. He did not whoop. He did not jump. He did not perform gratitude the way people sometimes expect children to. He simply held those shoes against his chest, closed his eyes, and stood there, like someone hearing a song they had forgotten they loved. Hayes watched him and said nothing, because some moments do not need words. Some moments only need witnesses. And she was honored, deeply, quietly honored, to be standing in that room, watching a little boy hold a pair of shoes, like they were the most precious things in the world. Because to him, in that moment, they were. There are moments in life that arrive without warning. Not the big planned moments, not the birthdays, not the graduations, not the celebrations you see coming from miles away. The moments that truly change everything are always the quiet ones, the ones that happen in small rooms, between ordinary people, on ordinary days, when nobody is watching, and nobody is performing, and the only thing present is raw, unfiltered, human truth. One of those moments was about to happen, in a small examination room, in a community health clinic, 12 blocks from Riverside Elementary, and nothing after it would ever be quite the same. Linda had not wanted to go. When Hayes had called her the night before, Linda had been polite, warm even, but underneath the warmth, Hayes could hear the resistance. "I am fine," Linda had said quietly. "I just need rest. Things are already so much better since you came. You have done so much already. I do not want to be a burden." Hayes had held the phone tightly. She had heard those words before, not from Linda specifically, but from 100 people who had spent so long putting themselves last, that they had forgotten they were allowed to be first. "Linda," Hayes had said gently but firmly, "getting yourself healthy is not a burden. It is the most important thing you can do for Marcus. He needs his mother. He does not need new shoes half as much as he needs you to be well." A long silence on the other end, then a very quiet, very small, "Okay." Hayes picked Linda up herself the next morning. Marcus had already gone to school. Linda was standing outside the building when Hayes pulled up. She was wearing her best blouse. Her hair was neatly done. She was holding her handbag with both hands like armor. She was terrified, and she was determined not to show it. Hayes recognized that combination immediately. She had seen it on Marcus's face a dozen times. Like mother, like son. The clinic director, Dr. Amara Osei, was a calm, soft-spoken woman with kind eyes and very steady hands. She did not rush. She did not make Linda feel like a case number. She sat across from her, asked her questions like she had all the time in the world, and listened, really listened, to every single answer. When Linda described her symptoms, Dr. Osei nodded slowly, writing careful notes, her expression professional but her eyes deeply attentive. When Linda finished, Dr. Osei set down her pen, folded her hands, and said, "I want to run some tests today. I want to be thorough, and I want you to know that whatever we find, we are going to face it together. You are not walking out of here alone. Do you understand?" Linda stared at her. For a moment she looked like she might argue, might deflect, might fold everything back inside herself the way she always had, but instead, her shoulders dropped, just slightly, just enough, and she nodded. The tests took most of the morning. Hayes sat in the waiting room the entire time. She answered work emails on her phone. She drank 2 cups of terrible waiting room coffee. She watched the door. An hour passed, then another. Finally Dr. Osei appeared in the doorway and gestured for Hayes to come. They stood in a small side corridor. Speaking quietly, the tests had revealed what 3 years of ignored symptoms had been trying to say. Linda had a chronic autoimmune condition. Her immune system had been quietly attacking her own body, wearing it down, exhausting it, explaining every symptom she had dismissed as tiredness, as weakness, as something she just needed to push through. The condition was serious. Dr. Osei did not soften that part. But then she said the words that made Hayes grip the wall beside her. It is treatable with the right medication and consistent care. People with this condition live full, normal, healthy lives. The key is that she starts now, not next month, now. Hayes closed her eyes for just a second. 3 years. 3 years of next month. And all along, the answer had been waiting, reachable, possible. If only someone had helped Linda get through the door. They went back in to Linda together. Dr. Osei explained everything clearly and calmly. The condition, the treatment plan, the medication that would be provided at no cost through a patient assistance program. The follow-up appointments already being scheduled. Linda sat very still through all of it. When Dr. Osei finished, Linda looked down at her hands for a long moment. Then she looked up. "So I am not dying," she said quietly. "You are not dying, Dr. Osei said firmly. "You are going to get better." What happened next was something Hayes would describe for the rest of her life. Whenever anyone asked her why she had stayed in education for so long, whenever anyone asked her if the work was worth it, Linda pressed both hands over her mouth. Her whole body shook once, just once, like a building absorbing an earthquake. And then she wept, not delicate tears, not quiet, dignified crying, but deep, heaving, long-held sobs, the kind that come from somewhere below words, below thought, below everything, from the place where 3 years of fear and exhaustion and silent, desperate hope had been stored and compressed and locked away. It all came out, right there, in that small examination room, with Dr. Osei on one side and Hayes on the other, both of them holding her hands and saying nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Some releases are sacred. Some tears are not grief. They are freedom. Later that afternoon, Hayes picked Marcus up from school personally. She drove him to the clinic. When he walked into the room and saw his mother sitting upright, color slowly returning to her face, eyes red but bright, holding a printed treatment plan in her hands like a map to somewhere better, he stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. Linda opened her arms. Marcus crossed the room in 3 steps and buried his face in her shoulder. Linda wrapped both arms around him, pressed her lips to the top of his head, and whispered something only he could hear. Hayes stood in the doorway and looked away, not because it was not beautiful, but because it was too beautiful, too private, too sacred for any extra eyes. It belonged only to them, a mother and her little warrior. Finally, on the other side of the storm,